$312. That is the number on the ad. Not $3,000, not $30,000, $312 a month. One payment, one login, one due date, instead of 3 cards, 3 statements, 3 weeks of juggling. The ad does not lie. The number is real. You can have one payment of $312. What the ad does not show is the second number. The second number is $4,000. That's what the $312 a month costs you over the life of the loan compared to paying the cards directly. $4,000 for one easy login. You already know something is wrong. You opened this video because the math in the ad felt too good, or because you signed 6 months ago and the balance is not moving the way you expected. You make the payment. You do it every month. You have not missed one. You open the loan account and look at the balance. It barely moves. You close the app. You sit with that for a moment. You open it again to make sure you read it correctly. The number is the same. You are doing everything right. Something is still wrong. This is the consolidation illusion. It's not your fault that you didn't see it. The illusion was designed to be invisible. The lower monthly payment is the bait. The longer timeline is the hook. The empty cards still in your wallet are the second trap that closes after the first one has already shut. This video documents the mechanism. You have 3 cards. Card 1, $4,200 at 22%. Card 2, $3,100 at 24%. Card 3, $2,700 at 19%. 3 statements, 3 due dates, 3 weeks of juggling. You are not behind any of them. You are paying every minimum every month. But you are tired. The juggling itself is the cost no one talks about. The bank sees this. The bank knows you are tired. The bank sends you an email. The email offers one loan, $10,000 at 14%. One payment, one login, $312 a month. Compare that to the $480 a month you are sending across 3 cards right now. The savings looks like $168 a month. You do the math in your head on a Tuesday night. You sign on Wednesday. The money clears the cards on Friday. By Saturday morning, all 3 card balances are at 0. For the first time in years, all 3 balances are 0. You feel like you won. You did not win. You traded. You traded a high payment over a short time for a low payment over a long time. The lower payment is the prize the bank wanted you to see. The longer timeline is the prize the bank wanted to keep for itself. This is not your fault. The historical record of American consumer credit, documented across Federal Reserve research from several decades, shows that the consolidation loan product was redesigned in the 1990s to extend repayment terms from 36 months to 60 months. That single change doubled the interest the lender collects on the average loan. It is not speculation. It is regulatory history. Research published in the journal Science, conducted by Eldar Shafir at Princeton and Sendhil Mullainathan at Harvard, confirmed that financial scarcity reduces cognitive bandwidth by the equivalent of a 13-point IQ reduction, the same effect as going without sleep for 24 hours. You are not making bad decisions because you are bad at math. You are making decisions while the trap itself is taking away your ability to do the math.
We need to adjust that.
This is the trap.
Precisely.
The exit exists inside the same mechanics that built the trap.
I'll mark it.
In this video, the design is made fully visible. 3 chains are examined in full. The first is the lower payment lie, the chain that makes a longer, more expensive loan feel like a win. The second is the empty card trap, the chain that turns 3 debts into 4 within 6 months. The third is the reset feeling, the chain that uses the relief of a clean slate to lower your guard at the exact moment you need it most. Each chain is named. Each chain has an exit. The exit is assembled at the end of this video as the real number protocol. The question is not whether the exit exists. The question is whether the decision to use it is made tonight or deferred until the next payment clears and the cost of deferral builds further. Now look at one more thing before the first chain. Pull up the loan paperwork or pull up the ad. Find the box that says monthly payment. That box is large. Now find the box that says total of payments. That box is smaller. It is often on a different page. It's the only number that tells you the truth. That is the design. This is the chain that makes a longer, more expensive loan feel like a win. To understand it, consider 2 buckets of water. The first bucket is large, but you have to carry it a short distance. The second bucket is small, but you have to carry it for miles. The second bucket feels easier in the moment. You pick it up. It is light. You start walking. The second bucket is lighter every step. But you take 1,000 steps. You take 10,000 steps. By the end of the walk, the total weight you carried in the small bucket is twice the weight of the large bucket. The lighter load was the longer load. This is exactly what happens with a consolidation loan. You have $10,000 in card debt. At your current minimum payments of $480 a month, the cards clear in roughly 28 months if you pay only the minimums. Total paid approximately $13,400. The consolidation loan offers $312 a month at 14% over 60 months. 60 months. 5 years. Total paid $18,720. $18,720 for a $10,000 debt. The difference is over $5,000 compared to paying the cards directly with the same effort. Individual results depend on interest rate, balance size, and the specific terms of the loan. But the pattern is consistent. The lower payment is not a discount. The lower payment is a longer leash. You feel lighter every month. You pay more in total. You can see this for yourself tonight. Open the loan paperwork. Multiply the monthly payment by the number of months. Write that number down. Subtract the loan amount from that number. What is left is what the loan costs you.
Quarterly figures
Most viewers find a number between $3,000 and $8,000.
They are right
That
here.
is the price of the lower monthly payment. The exit from this loop is not picking a different loan. The exit is paying the loan amount but for fewer months. A $10,000 loan at 14% over 24 months has a payment of approximately $480, the same as your current minimums. Total paid roughly $11,500. Same effort. $4,000 saved. The mechanism is documented in the protocol. The lower payment lie is the first chain. It is one mechanism. The second chain is different in how it operates, but identical in its effect. It works through the empty cards still in your wallet. This is the chain that turns 3 debts into 4 within 6 months. Consider a kitchen that has been cleaned. Every surface is wiped. Every dish is washed. Every counter is clear. It feels finished. You walk away. You come back the next morning. There is one dish in the sink. You leave it. It is one dish. By Friday, the sink holds 8 dishes. By Sunday, the counter holds 3 glasses and a plate. By the following Tuesday, the kitchen looks the way it looked before you cleaned it. You did not undo the cleaning intentionally. The kitchen was refilled because the kitchen was still being used. This is exactly what happens to the cards. The consolidation pays off the 3 cards on Friday. The balances are 0. The cards are still in your wallet. The credit limits are still active. Card 1, $5,000 limit, $0 balance. Card 2, $4,500 limit, $0 balance. Card 3, $3,500 limit, $0 balance. You now have $13,000 of available credit you didn't have before. The records document this consistently. Roughly 65% of people who consolidate carry new balances on the old cards within 18 months. They went from 3 debts to 4. The consolidation loan plus the 3 cards filling back up. This is the empty card trap. It does not happen because you are reckless. It happens because life keeps happening. The car needs new tires. The roof leaks. The kid needs braces. The cards are right there. The cards have nothing on them. The cards feel free. The cards are not free. Charlie Munger's documented investment philosophy rests on a 2-sided principle regarding compounding. The first, never interrupt it unnecessarily. The second, the side most people ignore, never allow it to run against you. The empty card trap is compounding running against you on 2 tracks at once. The consolidation loan accrues interest on its full $10,000. The cards begin accruing interest on every new charge at 22% to 24%. 18 months after the consolidation, the typical borrower has a consolidation loan balance of roughly $8,200, a new combined card balance of roughly $4,100, total debt $12,300. Before the consolidation, total debt was $10,000. The consolidation made the total debt bigger. You can feel this if it has already happened to you. This is the reason you don't look at the card statements anymore. This is the reason the loan balance numbers feel like they belong to someone else. It is the reason your chest tightens on Sundays. The exit from this loop is not willpower. You cannot willpower your way past an empty credit card sitting in a drawer. The exit is closing the cards or making them physically inaccessible the same week the consolidation closes. The mechanism is documented in the protocol. The empty card trap is the second chain. The third chain operates on the feeling itself. It is the chain that uses the relief of a clean slate to lower your guard. This is the chain that uses emotion as a weapon. Consider two workers, same employer, same role, same salary,
Quarterly figures look
$48,000 a
Yes,
year,
but let's verify
same
these
Monday
expenses.
morning. Both of them have 3 credit cards, both total around
I'll confirm the
$10,000.
schedule now.
Both
Great,
get
I'll
the
follow
same
up.
email from the bank
Hello?
offering the
Yes, I
same
can hear you
consolidation
clearly.
loan. This is the
The reports
variable.
are finalized.
The
I'll
same
send them
email
over.
in 2 different inboxes.
Yes,
What
that
happens
includes the
next
budget
is the
figures.
difference between
Goodbye.
the two paths. Marcus is the
I
first
understand the
worker.
urgency, but we need
Marcus
more
reads
time
the
to
email
review
on
the
a
details.
Tuesday at lunch. He sees
Yes,
the
I agree.
$312
Let's schedule
a
a
month.
follow-up for tomorrow.
He does the math against his
All right,
current
talk then.
$480 a month. He sees $168 a month in savings. He clicks the link. He fills out the form. He signs on
The Q3
Wednesday.
data shows
He
a
does
strong
not multiply
upward trajectory.
$312
Yes, the
by
efficiency gains are
60.
clear.
He does not subtract $10,000. He does not write down what the loan costs. The card's clear on Friday. He opens the bank app on Saturday morning. He sees 3 zeros. He has not seen 3 zeros in 4 years. He closes the laptop. He went to bed feeling lighter than he had in months. That feeling cost him $4,000. 3 months later, the car needs new tires. The bill is $640. The checking account holds $180. Marcus puts the tires on card 1. It is one charge. He will pay it off next month. He does not pay it off next month. The minimum is $25. He pays the minimum. By month 9, card 1 holds $1,200. By month 12, card 2 holds $800. By month 18, the 3 cards together hold $3,800. The consolidation loan still holds $8,400. Total debt, $12,200. Marcus didn't waste anything. He used the credit the way the system told him he could. The system gave the debt back. Lisa is the second worker. Lisa reads the email
This one
on a
needs to
Tuesday
go
morning.
here.
She sees the $312 a
Agreed.
month.
Keep the
She
caption
opens the
short.
loan paperwork. She finds the box on page 2.
Message
The box says
confirmed.
total
Priority
of
to
payments,
newsroom.
$18,720.
Envelopes for dispatch,
She wrote
sir.
that number on a piece of paper. She wrote $10,000 underneath it. She subtracts. The difference is $8,720. She puts the pen down. She picks it up again. She reads the numbers again. The numbers do not change. She did not sign on Wednesday. She opens a free debt payoff calculator instead. She enters her 3 card balances. She enters her current $480 a month payment. She reads the payoff date. The card's clear in 28 months. Total paid, $13,400. She wrote that next to the $18,720. The difference is $5,300. She closes the laptop. She did not consolidate. She kept paying $480 a month across the 3 cards. But she also did one more thing. She cut up 2 of the 3 cards. She kept 1 card for emergencies. She put that card in an envelope. She put the envelope in a drawer in the kitchen. She has not opened the drawer in 14 months. 3 years later, Marcus has approximately $9,800 in total debt across the loan and the refilled cards. Lisa has $0 in debt and approximately $2,400 in a separate savings account. Same job, same paycheck, same email. The difference was made on one Tuesday morning at lunch. The records document this pattern consistently. The single variable was the math done before signing, not the discipline after. The reset feeling is the third chain. The lighter the consolidation feels, the more dangerous it is. The relief is the trap. The exit from this loop doesn't feel differently. The exit is doing the math before the feeling arrives. The mechanism is the protocol. 3 chains are now visible. The protocol assembles them. The documented behavior of those who avoid the consolidation illusion follows a specific sequence. The sequence is not optional. Stage 2 cannot begin until Stage 1 is complete. Stage 3 cannot begin until Stage 2 is complete. Stage 1, find the real number. The documented behavior of those who escape this trap begins with one specific action. Tonight, not after the next payment, not after the weekend, open the consolidation offer or the existing loan paperwork. Find the box that says monthly payment. Find the box that says number of months or term. Multiply the 2 numbers together. Write that number down. That is what you will actually pay over the life of the loan. Now open a free debt payoff calculator. There are several available at no cost. Enter your current card balance. Enter the APR, annual percentage rate, printed on each statement. Enter what you are currently paying each month across all 3 cards. Read the total cost on the calculator. Write that number next to the loan number. The smaller number wins. This step costs nothing. It takes under 15 minutes. Individual results depend on the specific terms of your loan and cards. Without Stage 1, the rest of the protocol cannot function. Stage 2, Match the payment, cut the term. The documented behavior of those who use consolidation correctly involves one specific structural change. If the consolidation still makes sense after stage 1, which is rare but possible at very low interest rates, request a shorter term. A loan with the same payment as your current minimums, but over a shorter period costs thousands less. A $10,000 loan at 14% over 24 months has a payment of nearly $480. The same loan over 60 months has a payment of $312. The difference is over $5,000 in total interest. Same effort, totally different. If the consolidation does not make sense after stage 1, do not sign. Keep paying the 3 cards directly. The cards clear in approximately the same time as the shorter consolidation, without the loan ever being opened. Individual results depend on interest rate, balance size, and consistency of payments. Without stage 2, the lower payment lie continues operating. Stage 3, close the empty cards. The documented behavior of those who avoid the empty card trap involves one specific action the week the cards clear. If consolidation has already happened, this step is the rescue. If consolidation is being considered, this step is the safety net. The records document a consistent pattern. Keep 1 card for emergencies. The card with the lowest credit limit is the safest choice. Cut up the other cards, or call the issuer and request the accounts to be closed. Closing accounts can affect credit score temporarily. That trade-off is real. The trade-off is also worth it for most viewers in this trap. A 30-point credit score drop is recoverable. A $4,000 second debt is harder to recover from. For the 1 card kept, put it somewhere physically difficult to reach. A drawer, an envelope, a different room. The friction is the protection. Individual results depend on the specific accounts and credit history. The sequence is non-negotiable. The protocol exists. The exit is mapped. But the records also document 3 specific behaviors that return people to the starting point after the sequence has begun. They are worth naming before the closing. The first is the second consolidation. When the cards are refilled, the bank offers a second loan to consolidate the new debt plus the remaining balance of the first loan. The borrower signs. The cycle restarts at a higher total. The records show approximately 23% of consolidated borrowers consolidated a second time within 4 years. The second is the balance transfer offer. A 0% balance transfer offer arrives in the mail roughly 6 months after the cards clear. The borrower transfers a balance onto the empty card. The 0% rate expires in 12 to 18 months. The remaining balance shifts to 24%. The third is the authorized user add-on. The borrower adds a partner or family member to one of the empty cards as an authorized user. The card is now in use again. The balance grows. The borrower is responsible for the full balance regardless of who charges it. These are the returns to zero. The protocols are incomplete without naming them. The lower payment lie was documented. The empty card trap was named. The reset feeling was mapped. The 3 chains are visible now. That visibility is irreversible. You cannot unsee the math once you have seen it. You cannot unread the total of payments box once you have read it. The ad will still arrive in your inbox next month. The number on the ad will still look smaller than the number you are paying now. The difference is that you now know what the smaller number costs are. You know what sits on page 2 of the paperwork. You know which box tells the truth. Return to the opening number. $312. The number on the ad. The number that looked like a way out. The number that hides the $4,000 sitting behind it. The mathematics has not changed. What has changed is visibility. You now hold the map. The map does not pay the cards for you. The map does not lower your minimums. The map does not make the juggling less boring this week. The map shows you which door leads out and which door leads deeper in. That's the only thing it does. That is enough. Consider Lisa at month 28. The card balance is 0. The same paycheck. The same job. The same income that seemed insufficient to escape the cards. The $480 a month that used to go across 3 statements now goes to 1 savings account. The account holds approximately $2,400. Lisa did not get a raise. Lisa did not receive a windfall. Lisa did not find a side job. Lisa did not cut her grocery budget. Lisa sat at her kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. Lisa opened the loan paperwork. Lisa found the box on page 2. Lisa multiplied 2 numbers. Lisa wrote the results on a piece of paper. Lisa put the pen down. And then Lisa did not sign. That Tuesday morning is 28 months behind her now. The balances that followed her for years are gone. The statements arrive every month with zeros. There is no minimum due. There is no juggling. There is no Sunday afternoon tightness in the chest. The drawer in the kitchen still holds the envelope. The envelope still holds the one card. The card has not been touched in 14 months. Now consider Marcus at the same month. The same email. The same Tuesday. A different decision. Total debt at month 28, approximately $11,400. The consolidation loan. The refilled cards. The second consolidation offer sitting in his inbox right now. The difference between Marcus and Lisa was not income. It wasn't intelligence. It wasn't luck. It was 15 minutes at a kitchen table with a calculator and a pen. The documented record is consistent across every generation and every economic system. The exit exists. The door is open. It has always been open. The map is in your hands now. The only question is whether the decision is made tonight or deferred until the next payment clears and the cost of deferral builds further. You don't need a raise to start. You don't need a windfall to start. You need 15 minutes. You need the paperwork. You need a pen. The physics are waiting. That is all.